The mountains caught the first light in pink and gold, but down in the valley the cold still ruled. A woman's cheek pressed against rough pine, her wrists bound, above her head to a fence post that had stood 30 years. The man behind her breathed hard, not from effort but from something darker. Hoofbeats broke the quiet, slow, steady. One rider coming down the northern road. She didn't lift her head. She had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing to show. The man at her back went still, fist lowering just enough to look natural. The horse stopped at the gate. Boots hit the hard ground. A shadow stretched long across the frozen yard. The rider didn't speak. He just looked at the girl, at the rope, at the blood on his knuckles. And the mountains leaned in, waiting to see what this man who had passed trouble once would do now. The cold came first, before the light, before the birds, before anything soft or kind could find its way into the world. Cold came first in Montana, always did. Rose Calloway had learned that the hard way. 20 years of mornings had taught her body things her mind never wanted to know. How to be still before the house woke up. How to move through a kitchen without making a sound. How to hold a breath so long it stopped feeling like holding. She'd made the coffee at 4:15, the same time she made it every morning. Dark roast, 2 scoops. Water from the pump because Walter didn't trust the well water after August. She'd done everything right. She was almost certain she'd done everything right. Almost. The first thing she heard was the chair scraping against the floor. That sound. That particular sound. Her stomach knew what it meant before her brain did. She set the cup down carefully. The way you set down something you don't want to break. Except the cup wasn't what she was trying not to break. Walter Hale moved through his own house like bad weather. You couldn't stop it. You couldn't reason with it. You could only try to be somewhere else when it hit. She wasn't somewhere else. It's bitter, that was all he said. 3 words. The cup barely touched the table before it came back up, and her face learned what bitter tasted like from the outside. The fence post was old, rough pine, weathered gray, standing in the corner of the yard where it had stood for 30 years. Rose knew every grain of it, every splinter. The way the rope bit into the left side more than the right, because of how Walter tied knots. She knew because she'd been here before. Many times. The yard was empty except for them. The mountains to the west were just beginning to catch light. Pink and pale gold along the peaks. Beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you can't reach them. The horses hadn't started moving yet. The chickens were still quiet. The world hadn't woken up to see this. It never did. Walter stood behind her. She could hear him breathing hard. Not from effort. From satisfaction. There was a difference, and her body had learned to tell them apart. 20 years, he said, to no one in particular. 20 years and you still can't make a decent cup of coffee. Rose didn't answer. Answering made it longer. She pressed her cheek against the wood and looked at the mountains and thought about nothing. That was the trick, the only one she'd ever found that worked. Go somewhere inside yourself that he couldn't reach. Find the smallest, quietest corner. Sit down in it. Wait, except something was different this morning. A sound. Hoofbeats. Coming down the road from the northern pass. Slow and steady. 1 horse. 1 rider. Walter heard it too. She felt him go still behind her. Gideon Voss did not come to the Calloway farm looking for trouble. That was the first thing. Important. He came for cattle. 6 head of Black Angus that Walter Hale had borrowed against a debt 18 months ago. And hadn't returned, and hadn't mentioned, and apparently had decided he simply wasn't going to think about anymore. Gideon had thought about it. He thought about most things longer than other people thought was normal. Came with living alone at 6,000 feet, when the nearest neighbor is 4 miles of mountain trail away. You either learn to sit with your own thoughts or you go sideways. He'd learned to sit. He came down the north road the same way he came down every road. Easy, unhurried, letting the horse, a big roan he called nothing because he didn't name horses, set the pace. The morning air was cold and clean and he could smell pine and wood smoke and something else. Something copper. He pulled up before he knew he'd decided to. The roan stopped, ears forward, nostrils wide, and Gideon Voss, who stood 6 feet and 8 inches and 280 pounds, and had not been surprised by much in the last 15 years of living alone, felt something happen in his chest that he didn't have a good word for. There was a girl tied to a fence post, a young woman, 20 maybe, red-brown hair loose around her shoulders, a dress that had been mended too many times to mend again, and a man standing behind her with his fist raised and blood on his knuckles from the fists that had already landed. Gideon sat on his horse and looked at this. He sat very still, and for exactly 3 seconds, the part of his brain that had kept him alive through 15 years of hard winters said, "Not your business, get the cattle, go home." 3 seconds. Then something else took over. Here is the thing about Gideon Voss and the Callaway farm. He had been here before, not this morning. 3 months ago, October, the tail end of it, when the aspens had gone gold and the first real cold was coming down off the peaks. He'd ridden past on his way to the Alderman's Spread, 7 miles further south, and he'd heard something from inside the fence line. A sound, not quite a scream, not quite crying. Something in between. Something that a person makes when they've forgotten that making sounds changes anything. He'd pulled up then too, sat on his horse, listened. And then told himself it was a family matter, kicked the roan forward, and didn't look back. He'd told himself that 11 times since October. 11 times lying in the dark of his cabin, with the wind going under the eaves and the fire burning down to coals. 11 times he'd run it back in his head. The sound, the fence line. The direction he'd ridden instead of stopping. This morning, riding down that same road, he'd told himself he was coming for cattle and nothing else. Which was true, mostly true. Except his hand had checked the rifle in the scabbard twice before he reached the gate. Somewhere between fast and slow, the way a very large man moves when he doesn't want to startle anyone into doing something stupid. Gideon got down from the horse. Boots hit the hard ground. The roan shifted behind him. He looped the reins over the gatepost and walked into the yard. Walter Hale turned around. He was a big man, Walter. Not as big as Gideon, but big enough to be used to getting his way with size. 52 years old and thick in the shoulders, accustomed to a particular expression on people's faces. When he looked at them, he did not get that expression from Gideon Voss. Walter lowered his fist, slowly, like a man trying to look like he'd been about to lower it anyway. "You're early, sun's up," Gideon said. That's not early. He was not looking at Walter. He was looking at the girl at the fence post. Her back was to him. Her wrists were tied above her head. She had gone very still, the way animals go still when a new predator enters their field. Not because they feel safer, but because stillness is the only option left. Her shoulders were shaking, slight. Almost nothing. Almost. Gideon looked at Walter. Walter looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "Just disciplining my daughter," Walter said. His voice had gone casual, the way a man's voice goes casual when he's working very hard to sound like nothing is wrong. "You know how it is. Children need, she's not a child. Flat. No heat in it. Just a fact." Walter's jaw tightened. "It's a family matter, Voss. I'll get your cattle settled and we can." "I came for the cattle," Gideon said. "I'll get to that." He walked toward the fence post. Walter moved to intercept him, got one step in, before he looked up at the full height of what was coming toward him, and reconsidered. Gideon stopped in front of the girl. She still hadn't turned around. "You can turn around," he said, quiet. "The way you talk to something that's been frightened badly. I'm not going to hurt you." She turned around slowly, and the world, or at least Gideon Voss's version of it, stopped making sense. Green eyes. He knew those eyes. Didn't know how he knew them. Just knew. The way you know a road you've only traveled once in bad conditions in the dark, half lost. Your hands remember what your brain forgot. Green eyes. Specific green. "Like creek water in shadow, I know you," he said. She looked at him. Nothing in her face gave anything away. 20 years of training. Don't react. Don't let him see what lands. But her eyes. There was something moving in her eyes that the training hadn't gotten to yet. "No," she said. "Careful. Quiet. You don't." He looked at her for another moment, and then it came back. 1 year ago, November. A blizzard that came out of nowhere, which was how the worst ones always came. 3 days of whiteout conditions. Temperature dropping to 20 below before the first night was over. The kind of cold that gets inside the walls of a cabin, inside the blankets, inside your bones, and sits there like an unwanted guest who knows you can't make them leave. His nephew, Danny, had been visiting, 8 years old. Born curious in the way that 8-year-old boys are born curious, which is to say, dangerously. He'd been outside playing near the creek at 2 in the afternoon when the storm hit. By the time Gideon looked out the window 10 minutes later, the world had gone white. Danny was gone beach parties. 3 of them. 2 abandoned. 1 forced back by a visibility of less than 3 feet, and temperatures that would kill a man in an hour without the right gear. By the second day, people stopped saying the optimistic things. By the third day, Gideon had stopped sleeping. He was sitting at his table at 3 in the morning on that third night, staring at nothing when he heard a sound at his door. Not a knock. A weight. Something leaning. He opened the door and she was there, a girl he'd never seen before. 19 years old, maybe. Red-brown hair plastered to her face. Lips blue-gray with cold. A thin shawl around her shoulders. Her shawl? He understood after a moment, because the child wrapped inside it was wearing it instead of her. Danny, unconscious, shaking, but breathing. I found him by the creek, she said. Her voice was barely there. He was very cold. He needed to come inside. Gideon reached for Danny. She passed the boy over carefully. Steady hands despite everything her body was doing. Come in, Gideon said. Come inside, you need to. I'm all right, she said. She wasn't all right. She was hypothermic and gray-faced, and had just carried a child, through a blizzard for God knows how long. But something in the way she said it, I'm all right, wasn't a lie exactly. It was something more like a wall, a polite wall. The kind a person builds when they've learned that accepting help has a cost. She turned to go. Wait, he said. What's your name? Where do you live? How do I? But she was already gone, back. Into the white. He'd stood in the doorway too long, holding his nephew, watching the storm close around the place where she'd been. He'd gone out the next morning when the weather broke and tried to track her. Found nothing. Asked everyone he could find in a 2-week radius. Nobody knew a girl like that, or they said they didn't, which, he now understood, was not the same thing. He looked at Walter Hale. Something was happening in his chest again. How much? He said. Walter blinked. I beg your pardon. The cattle you owe me, Gideon said. How many head? 6, but I don't see what that has to. I'll take 6, Gideon said, and I'll take her. The yard went very quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. Walter's face did something complicated. It cycled through several expressions quickly. Shock, outrage. Something calculating. Something that tried to be moral and didn't make it all the way there. She's my daughter, he said. I know what she is, Gideon said. How much? Walter stared at him. Gideon waited. He was very good at waiting. Men who lived alone above the tree line got good at waiting. Something shifted in Walter's eyes. The calculation won. It always did, with men like Walter. Gideon had met enough of them to know. Double the cattle, Walter said. 12 head. And 200 in cash. It was more than fair for a man who had nothing. It was insulting to say out loud. Gideon said, done. He'd made the agreement. He'd shaken the hand. He was reaching into his jacket for the cash, when Walter said, I'd like a moment with my daughter to say goodbye. And Gideon, who should have known better, who had no excuse because he was not a stupid man, said, all right, 1 word. That was all it cost. Walter moved past him. Rose's face, which had been doing that careful blank thing, suddenly went somewhere else, somewhere further inside. And Gideon understood 1 second. Too late what? A moment to say goodbye meant to a man like Walter Hale. It meant something different. It meant a last thing. A last mark. Something that would travel with her and remind her, every time she felt the echo of it, who she had belonged to. Walter's fist connected with her left side, below the ribs, where something had been broken before and healed wrong. Rose made a sound, not a scream, something smaller and more terrible than a scream. And her legs went out. She was going to hit the ground. She didn't. Gideon moved. For a man his size, in that moment he moved fast. Got his hands under her before she landed. Went down to one knee on the cold dirt of the yard. both arms around her, her weight settling against him. She grabbed his jacket, both fists, the fabric between her fingers, and she held on. He stayed very still, held her. Didn't say anything, because what was there to say? Behind him, Walter was straightening his coat, making the sound of a man who has done what needed doing. That's what happens, Walter said, to the yard, to the mountains, to nobody. When you raise a thing that has no gratitude. Gideon stood up slowly. Still holding Rose, he turned and looked at Walter Hale. Walter looked back. And then, because Walter was a smart man in the way that cowards are sometimes smart, which is to say, he understood consequences clearly enough to avoid them. He looked away first. Get your cattle on your way out, Walter said. There's nothing more to discuss. Rose Calloway, the name had always been her mother's, never his. She had never carried the name Hale, and she never would. The road back was long. Rose sat in front of him on the roan, facing forward, not leaning back, holding herself upright. That particular posture of a person who has spent years making sure no part of their body was an inconvenience to anyone. He let the horse go slow, slower than necessary. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Mountains, sky going from pink to blue, the sound of hooves on frozen ground. Then, quietly, "You don't know me," she said. Same words as before, but different now, less like a wall, more like a question. He thought about how to answer that. "I know you carried a boy through a blizzard in November," he said. "And I know you turned down a cup of hot tea and disappeared back into the storm. And I know I spent 3 weeks after that asking everyone I could find if they knew a girl with green eyes who lived somewhere in this valley." Silence. "Nobody told you," she said. "Nobody told me." More silence. "They know better," she said. And the way she said it, without bitterness, just flat fact, said more than the words did. Gideon thought about the 11 nights he'd lain awake, the sound from the fence line, the direction he'd ridden. "I went past your farm," he said. "I heard something." He felt her go very still against him. "I kept riding," he said. A long pause. "Okay," she said. "It wasn't okay," he said. "I've known that since October." She didn't answer. He didn't ask her to. Some apologies don't need a response. Some apologies are just a stone you put down in front of someone and let them look at. The cabin was not what she expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Something rough, maybe. A man that size, living alone that long, in country like this. But the cabin was solid and clean, and the woodpile was enormous. And there was a garden, dead now for winter. But you could see it had been tended. There were books. 3 shelves of them. She stared. Danny was at the neighbor's place 2 miles over. He'd been staying there while Gideon made the trip down to the valley. Gideon sent a note with a passing rider saying he'd collect the boy in the morning. 2 women from the nearest settlement came that afternoon. Gideon had clearly sent for them ahead of time, somehow, through the mysterious mountain country system of getting messages to people you needed, without anyone being able to say exactly how it worked. They didn't ask questions, they just worked. Warm water, clean cloth, something herbal that smelled like pine, and something else. Something Rose couldn't name, that they applied to her ribs with hands that knew what they were doing. Gideon sat outside on the step, in the cold, for 2 hours, close enough to hear, far enough to give her room. Not asking to come in, not checking how things were going, just present, outside, between her and the rest of the world. Rose sat on the edge of the bed while the women worked and looked at the door and thought about that, a man who sat outside in the cold, so she could have a room to herself. She turned this over in her mind the way you turn over something small and heavy, examining it, testing whether it was real. That night, the women left. The fire burned low. Danny was still at the neighbor's. The cabin settled into the particular quiet of a high-altitude night, which is not like other quiet. It has weight to it, texture like snow. Rose lay down on the bed they'd prepared for her. It was soft. She hadn't slept on something soft since she could remember. The mattress in her room at the farm had been a piece of canvas over a wood frame, and she'd been grateful for the canvas. This was soft. She stared at the ceiling. Her ribs ached. Her wrists, where the rope had been, were ringed in raw red. Her face still held the particular deep bruise warmth. that meant tomorrow would be worse before it was better. But the room was quiet, and the door was solid, and outside, through the wall, she could hear the occasional small sound of Gideon Voss moving around the other room. Close enough to hear, far enough to give her room. Just present a sound that meant, someone is here, not to take anything, not to demand anything, just here. Rose Calloway, 20 years old, who had not cried in front of another person's since she was 7 years old, and learned what crying in front of the wrong person costs you, put her hands over her face in the dark and cried. Not much. She wasn't built for much anymore, but some. Enough, the soft, almost silent kind of crying that a person does when they are very careful not to let anyone hear, but the reason they're careful isn't fear this time. The reason this time is that it's private theirs, just theirs. 3 days past, Danny came back the next morning, tearing through the door at approximately the speed of every 8-year-old who has been away from something interesting for too long. He stopped when he saw Rose, tilted his head. The way children do when they're running a calculation their faces haven't caught up with yet. Then, "You're the snow lady." Rose blinked. "Uncle Gideon looked for you," Danny said. Very serious, for weeks. He kept asking people if they'd seen a lady with green eyes in the snow, and everyone said no, and he didn't believe them. Danny, Gideon said from behind him. "What?" "It's true." Gideon looked at the ceiling briefly. Rose looked at Gideon. Something small moved across his face, there and gone. The expression of a man who has been told an accurate thing. He would have preferred to remain private. "It's true," he said. "Just that. No apology for it. No embarrassment. Just, it's true, and I said I would be honest with you, so." Danny appointed himself Rose's guide to everything important in the immediate vicinity. The socks that were the warmest. The cup that didn't wobble. The window with the best view of the mountain to the east, that turned gold exactly right at 4 in the afternoon. The names of the 2 squirrels who lived in the woodpile, whom Danny had named Admiral. And the other one. "Why Admiral?" Rose asked. "He looks like he's in charge," Danny said, completely confident. "You can just tell." Rose looked at the squirrel. The squirrel looked back. "I think I see it," she said. And Danny, 8 years old and already a politician, beamed at her, like she'd said exactly the right thing, the 7th day. That was when things changed, not dramatically, not with a sign or a signal or any of the things that should announce that the world is about to tilt. Just a Tuesday, cold and clear. Danny eating oatmeal too fast, and burning his tongue and looking personally offended by the existence of heat. Rose was standing at the window. She'd been doing that more. Standing, upright, without bracing herself against anything. It sounds like nothing. It was not nothing. For a woman who had spent 20 years making herself as small as possible, Womber, in every room, standing at a window and just looking out, was enormous. "You're doing it again," Danny said. "Doing what?" "The staring thing. Uncle Gideon does it too. You both just stare at the mountain like it's going to say something." Rose considered this. Maybe it is. Danny thought about that with the absolute seriousness of an 8-year-old encountering a new philosophical position. What would a mountain say? "Nothing fast," Rose said. Danny nodded, decided this was acceptable. Went back to his oatmeal. Outside, Gideon was splitting wood. He'd been splitting wood for 2 hours. Not because they needed more wood. The woodpile was already the size of a reasonable shed. He split wood the way some men walked, or ran, or drank. Because the body needed somewhere to put what the mind was working through. Rose watched him from the window. She wasn't watching him the way people sometimes watched her, measuring. Calculating threat. She was watching him the way you watch something that confuses you, in a good way. The way you watch something that doesn't behave the way the pattern says it should. He hadn't asked her anything, in 7 days, not, "What are you going to do next?" Not, "When are you leaving?" Not even, "How are you feeling?" Which was the one that always felt like a trap, because the only honest answer was, "I don't know what that question means," and that answer made people uncomfortable. He'd just let her be here, which was so strange she kept waiting for the catch. There wasn't a catch. That was the strangest part. The oatmeal incident of that morning was not the last incident. Danny, it turned out, was an incident factory. Continuous production, no downtime. He found the creek and wanted to build something in it. He found a bird with a suspicious wing and wanted to fix it. He found what he described as a very interesting hole in the woodpile, and Gideon had to spend 20 minutes explaining that interesting holes in woodpiles are not things you put your hand into. Why not? Because something lives in it. What kind of something? The kind that bites. Danny looked at the hole. Deeply betrayed by the universe. That seems unfair. It does, Gideon agreed. Don't put your hand in it. Rose was sitting on the step during this exchange, in her coat, in the cold. Because she could. Because nobody told her she was allowed to sit somewhere, and she did it anyway, and nothing happened. She had been testing this. Small experiments. Sitting where she wanted, eating when she was hungry, speaking when she had something to say. Nothing happened. Every time, nothing happened. It was the most disorienting thing she'd ever experienced, and she had experienced some genuinely disorienting things. She caught Gideon looking at her from the other side of the yard. Not like that, not measuring, just noticing. The way you notice when something that was wrong is becoming slightly more right. She looked away first, then looked back. He'd already looked away. Good, that was good. That was fine. That was absolutely nothing worth thinking about. She thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. On the third day, the woman from down the road came to check the ribs. "You've had these broken before," she said. Matter of fact, no drama in it. "Yes," Rose said, "more than once." "Yes," the woman pressed her lips together. "They healed wrong twice. This one's fresh. It'll heal better if you rest it, all right. I mean actually rest it. Not what people say when they mean they'll rest it a little and then go do something." "All right," Rose said again. The woman looked at her. "You're going to rest it," she said, slightly surprised. "You told me to," Rose said. The woman blinked. And then something moved across her face, a kind of softness. Quick and not sentimental, just human. And she packed her bag without saying anything else. That evening, Gideon came inside earlier than usual. The temperature was dropping. He'd spent most of the day doing whatever large men who live on mountains alone do. There had been chopping sounds, and then some carpentry sounds, and then some sounds that were probably just carrying things from one place to another because they needed to be somewhere else. He came in, knocked the snow off his boots, hung his coat, looked at her. "You're sitting up," he said. "I've been sitting up for 2 days," she said. "You've been sitting up carefully," he said. "That's different." She thought about this. "Fair," she said. He poured himself coffee. Looked at her again. "Do you want some?" Nobody had asked her if she wanted something in a long time. The question landed strangely. Not bad, just strange, like a door she'd forgotten was a door. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He poured a second cup, handed it to her. She took it with both hands. Felt the warmth come through. The cabin was quiet, except for the fire. "I have to tell you something," she said. She hadn't planned to say it today. She hadn't planned to say it at all, maybe, but the coffee was warm and the fire was low, and Danny was asleep in the back room. And the quiet was different from the quiet she'd grown up inside of. That old quiet had weight, like a held breath. A waiting quiet, the silence of a house that was counting down. This quiet had no countdown. She'd been sitting it for 7 days, testing that. Waiting for the shift. Waiting for the thing that came after the quiet at the farm. Nothing came. Just quiet. "And so I have to tell you something," she said again. "About my father." Gideon settled into the chair across from her. It was a solid chair. He was a solid man. They suited each other. He looked at her and waited. Not impatiently. Not like a man who is going to ask helpful follow-up questions. Just, "I'm here and I'm listening, and I'll still be here when you get to the end of it." Rose wrapped both hands around her cup, looked at the fire. "And started 5 years ago," she said. "I was 15. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something from the barn." She paused. He waited. "My father was loading oil drums onto the wagon. Heavy ones. Kerosene. He had rags soaked in something I could smell from the window, something that made my eyes water just from the smell. It was past midnight, and he didn't want anyone to see him." She stopped again. The fire popped. "The next morning," she said. The Brennan farm was gone. The word gone sat in the air between them. All 5 of them, Rose said. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan. Their 3 children. The youngest was 4. She had not said this out loud before. Not once. Not to a single person. The words had lived inside her for 5 years, taking up space, pressing against the inside of her ribs every time she breathed. Walter had never confirmed it. Never denied it. He hadn't needed to. The morning after the fire, when word came to the farm, Rose had looked at her father's face, and his face had done something she could never unlearn. Relief, just a flash of it. Gone before anyone else would have caught it, but she caught it. She'd spent the next 5 years making sure he didn't know she'd caught it. The beatings got worse that year. She hadn't understood why until now. Or rather, she had understood, she'd just not let herself name it, because naming it meant carrying it. And she'd been barely surviving carrying what she already had. She looked up at Gideon. He was looking at her. Still. His coffee untouched. He owed them money, Rose said. The Brennans held the note on the farm. He'd borrowed more than he could ever pay back. And when they gave him a final date, she stopped. You don't have to say all of it tonight, Gideon said. No, she said. I do. I've not said it once in 5 years. And that family has 5 members who are ashes in the ground because I didn't. He looked at her steadily. That's not what kept them in the ground, he said. That's what kept you breathing. The fire. The quiet. The mountain outside doing what mountains do, which is nothing, and somehow that nothing was exactly what she needed. I know, she said, but I'm still saying it. She did. All of it. And Gideon Voss, who had lived alone for 8 years and learned how to be in silence and how to let silence be enough, sat in his chair, in his cabin above the tree line, and did not move, and did not look away, and did not offer her anything except the most valuable thing she'd ever been given. His complete and total attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The Brennans, Gideon said, yes, their oldest. James, he was in school with my cousin's boy. He said this quietly, not for effect, just placing them, making them real again. People, not a story. Good kid, you know the kind. Laughed at everything. I'm sorry, Rose said. You were 15, he said. And scared, and alone, I know, but I'm still sorry. He nodded, accepting that, not arguing with it. What do you want to do about it? Not. What should we do? Not. Leave it to me. What do you want to do? She thought about that. I want someone to know the truth, she said. The right someone. Someone who can do something with it. All right, Gideon said. You know someone like that. I do. How soon can you reach them? He looked at her. And something in his face, not surprise exactly. More like recognition. Like he was watching something he'd suspected become something he knew. I'll send a message in the morning, he said. Then, you're not alone with this anymore. Simple. Direct. Not a promise to fix it. Not a vow to destroy the man responsible. Just, you are not alone with this. That part, at least, is over. She looked at him. 20 years of mornings. 20 years of learning to be invisible. 20 years of a cold that came before the light. Okay. She said one word, but she meant it. That night, Walter Hale was already talking, riding from one neighboring farm to the next, stopping at the general store, finding the deputy's ear, spinning what spinners spin, which is truth into shape, until the shape is so far from the original you'd never know where it came from. Rose was unstable. Rose had fantasies. Rose had tried to set fire to the house while he slept. Rose had been dangerous her whole life, ever since she came into the world the wrong way and took her mother with her on the way out. And that mountain man, that Voss, had been taken in by a liar. It was a good performance. Walter Hale had given it many times. The seeds went into the ground. He knew how to wait for things to grow. Rose didn't know any of this yet. She sat in the cabin and drank her coffee. Outside, the mountain turned gold at 4 o'clock, exactly when Danny had said it would. The squirrels, Admiral and the other one, moved through the woodpile in whatever pattern squirrels have decided constitutes a meaningful afternoon. The fire burned, the quiet held, and Rose Calloway, 20 years old, who had never in her life been allowed to just be somewhere without the constant calculation of cost and risk and consequence, sat very still and breathed in out, like someone trying to remember how. The message went out through the Mountain Country Network. No telegraph, no post office. A system of writers and traders and men who owed each other favors, passing information through handshakes and whispers and folded notes pressed into palms at crossroads. Walter Hale couldn't intercept it. He didn't even know it existed, that was the point. The message was simple. Gideon had learned that simple messages arrive tacked old, debt to collect. Come to the north cabin. Bring your kit. 2 words at the end would tell Silas Drum everything he needed to know about the kind of job this was. Bring your kit. Silas had a kit. It contained, among other things, a notebook that had seen things that would put 6 men in the ground, a camera, small and portable and expensive, 3 different sets of identity papers, none of them false exactly, just flexible, a set of tools for examining fire damage that he'd developed himself over 12 years of doing this work, and a particular quality of attention that Gideon had seen exactly twice in his life and recognized as rare. Silas Drum paid attention the way other people breathed, without thinking about it, without effort, just, constantly, completely. He arrived on the 12th morning after the message went out. Rose heard the horse first, came to the window, watched a thin man on a gray horse come down the northern track, at the kind of pace that suggested he'd been traveling since before dawn, and had not felt the need to hurry because he was already going the right speed. He was 58 years old and looked like someone had made him out of wire and patience. Gray, at the temples. Dark eyes that moved through a room the way water moves through rock, finding every crack, noting every gap, not stopping until they'd been everywhere. He got off the horse and looked up and saw Rose in the window. She didn't step back. First time she hadn't stepped back from a stranger's gaze. She noted that, filed it away with the other small experiments. He nodded once, acknowledgement, not threat. She nodded back. Inside, Gideon made introductions. Short ones, Rose. Silas Drum, ma'am, Mr. Drum. Silas is fine. Rose is fine. Gideon poured coffee. The 3 of them sat at the table. Danny had been sent to the neighbors with very clear instructions, and a bribe of 2 peppermint sticks. Silas looked at Rose. Tell me what you saw, he said. From the beginning. Everything. Even the things that seemed small, she told it again. Each time the story came out differently. Not the facts, those stayed fixed, hard and specific as stones. But the shape of it changed. First time, confession, like a crime she'd committed by knowing it. Second time, something she needed to put down before it crushed her. This time, testimony. She didn't know the difference until she heard herself say it. Silas didn't write much. 3 things in his notebook. Everything else he carried in his head. When she stopped, he looked at what he'd written. The smell, he said. You said kerosene and soaked rags. How far from the window? 30 feet maybe, and the smell reached you clearly. It made my eyes water, he wrote something. That's a significant concentration, not someone topping off a lamp. The rags, how many? A pile. 2 feet across, maybe more. Did you see him load them loose or bundled? Bundled. Wrapped around something. Like, she stopped, thought. Went back to that night and looked at it carefully, the way she'd never let herself look at it. Like he'd prepared them earlier, somewhere else. They were already soaked when he brought them out. Silas looked up. You're certain he wasn't pouring anything in the yard? They were ready before he came out. Silas wrote something longer this time. That's premeditation, he said. Not to her, to himself, to his notebook. That's not impulse, not panic, not even rage. That's planning, which means he looked up. How much did the Brennan family hold out on the Callaway note? Rose looked at him. I don't know the exact number, ballpark. Enough that losing it would mean losing the farm. Did your father ever mention them? Before? He called Mr. Brennan soft, Rose said. Said he gave too many extensions on debts. Said it was weakness. Silas made a sound, not quite a laugh. The sound of a man who recognizes a particular kind of irony. He borrowed from a man he thought was weak. He borrowed from a man who was kind, Rose said. He thought they were the same thing. Silas looked at her. Something shifted in his quick. Gone. They're not the same thing, he said. I know that now, she said. He stayed for 3 hours that first day. Then he got on his horse and rode south. Just 10 days. If I'm not back, assume I'm not coming. Gideon walked him to the gate. Rose watched from the window. The two men talked for a moment. She couldn't hear what was said. Gideon was facing away from her. Silas said something. Gideon's shoulders did something. Not tension, not quite. The posture of a man receiving difficult information and deciding not to let it show. Silas rode away. Gideon stood at the gate for a moment. Then turned and walked back. He came inside, poured himself coffee, sat down. Rose looked at him. "He thinks it's real," she said. "Not a question." "He thinks it's real," Gideon said, and? Gideon looked at his coffee. "And Walter's going to notice someone's asking questions eventually. Silas knows how to be careful. But men like your father," he stopped, chose the next words deliberately. "They survive this long because they're paranoid. And paranoid men notice things. How much danger is Silas in? Some. How much are we in?" Gideon looked up at her. "Some," he said again. She nodded. She'd been in danger her whole life. The kind that lived in the house with you and knew your schedule and called itself family. This was a different kind of danger. The kind that came from telling the truth instead of swallowing it. She found, sitting with that comparison, that this kind was easier to bear. "Teach me to shoot," she said. Gideon blinked. First time she'd surprised him, she could tell. "You don't know how?" "Walter didn't teach me anything he thought I might use against him." A pause. "Fair point," Gideon said. He set down his coffee. "Tomorrow morning. We start early." They started early, 6 in the morning. Cold enough that her breath made clouds. He handed her a rifle and corrected her grip 3 times in the first 2 minutes, wordlessly, just repositioning her hands, and she noticed that each time he moved her hands he announced it first. A small warning. "Here." And then the adjustment. So she would never be grabbed without warning. He probably didn't know he was doing it. She noticed. She missed the first 4 shots close, but not close enough. Not against targets. Not against what was coming. "Stop thinking about the target," Gideon said. "What should I be thinking about?" "Nothing. Your hands know what to do. Your brain is slowing them down." She tried that. Stopped thinking. Hit the next one, then the one after. Then 3 in a row. Gideon said nothing. He nodded, which, she had learned, was Gideon's equivalent of a standing ovation. She lowered the rifle, looked at the target. Something was moving through her chest that she didn't have a word for. Not pride exactly. More like keepability. The sensation of a body discovering something it could do that nobody had ever let it know. "It could do, again," she said. They shot for 2 hours. Danny came home at noon, saw the targets, and immediately wanted to try. Gideon handed him an extremely small and carefully supervised version of the experience. Danny missed everything gloriously and didn't care at all, which was its own kind of success. That evening Rose sat on the step, the mountain going gold at 4. Admiral, running along the top of the woodpile, the other one doing whatever the other one did, which was mostly nothing in a suspicious way. She had a rifle next to her. Not because she expected anything, just because it was there. And she could on the 10th day after Silas left. He didn't come back. Rose woke up and counted on her fingers, which was unnecessary, because she'd been counting every day and understood what the absence meant. She came out of her room. Gideon was already awake, already at the table. His coffee was cold, which meant he'd been awake for a while and hadn't been paying attention to the coffee. He looked up. "I know," he said. "You're not sending anyone after him. I can't. If something happened," he stopped. "Sending someone else puts someone else in the same situation. So we wait. We wait." Rose sat down. The word wait had always been a terrible word. For 20 years, wait had meant, endure this, absorb this. Let this continue happening to you while you wait for it to stop. Waiting was passive. Waiting was surrender, dressed up in patience. But this was different. This waiting was a choice. She was waiting because she and Gideon had agreed on it. Because it was the right move. Not because she had no other option. She could distinguish between those two things now. She could feel the difference in her chest. "Tell me about Silas," she said. "How do you know him?" Gideon wrapped both hands around his mug. "Nevada. I was working the mines outside of Carson City. He was already doing what he does, more or less. Finding things people wanted to stay lost. What did he find that you needed?" Gideon was quiet a moment. A man who owed wages to 34 miners, he said, took the payroll and left. Silas tracked him to Reno and got the money back. I wasn't one of the 34. I'd left the mine by then. But I knew some of them. He paused. He didn't take a fee. Just returned the money and rode on. Why no fee? Gideon looked at the table. He said he had enough. And some things weren't about enough. Rose thought about that. I like him, she said. Most people do, Gideon said. Right up until he finds something they'd rather stayed hidden. Silas came back on the 12th day. He came back at a gallop, which was wrong. He came back in the afternoon, which was also wrong. He was supposed to approach slowly, carefully, announcing himself. He came through the gate at speed and pulled up hard in the yard and got off the horse, and Rose could see from the window that something was different about the way he was moving. She was outside before Gideon got to the door. Silas's left arm was wrapped from shoulder to elbow in his own coat. The coat was dark in patches, dark in the specific way that wet wool gets dark. 3 men, he said. He was steady, voice level. The kind of level that takes work. On the South Road. They knew where I'd be. Gideon was already there. Taking Silas's weight without being asked. Steering him toward the step, which means, Rose started. Which means Walter knows someone is asking questions, Silas said. He doesn't know who yet, but he knows. He sat down on the step. Let out a careful breath. We have less time than I thought. Rose crouched down in front of him. She looked at the wrapped arm. Can I see it? Silas looked at her. You know wounds? I know what he did to me well enough to know what needs cleaning, and what needs more than that. A beat, Silas held out his arm. She unwrapped it carefully. The wound was long, not deep. A graze, which meant the shot had been close and Silas had moved. If he hadn't moved, she didn't finish that thought. It needs cleaning, she said, and closing. I can do both, you sure? I'm sure of about 4 things in my life, Rose said. This is one of them, she did it. Gideon held the lantern. Silas didn't make a sound, which was impressive, and then made one small sound at the final part, which was understandable, and also somewhat reassuring because it meant he was human. When it was done, she sat back. Tell me what you found, she said. Silas had found 4 people. He opened his notebook with his good hand, Edna Holt. 70 years old, lives on the Faro Road, about 3 miles north of the Brennan property. She was on that road the night of the fire. Coming home from her sister's late, because her sister had been ill, and she'd stayed through supper, he looked up. She saw Walter Hale driving north. Rose went very still. His wagon, Silas continued. His horse. She knew both. She'd bought grain from him twice and recognized the horse by its markings. He passed her going toward the Brennan farm. She noted the time because she had a watch her husband gave her, and she checked it when the wagon startled her horse. Did she see what was in the wagon? She saw shapes. Couldn't identify them, but she smelled something. Said it was strong enough that her horse shied. He turned a page. She's been quiet about it for 5 years because 2 weeks after the fire, Hale stopped her at the general store and told her that nighttime roads were dangerous for women traveling alone. A threat dressed as concern. Rose knew that particular garment. She'd worn it for 20 years. She'll talk? Gideon said, she said. I've been waiting for someone to come ask me, Silas paused, which means either she's been hoping or she's been afraid of what happens if she comes forward on her own. Both, Rose said. It's always both. Silas looked at her, nodded. Both. Yes, he turned another page. Jeb Alcott, traveling merchant. He crossed paths with Hale on an unusual route at an unusual hour, about a mile from the Brennan property. He didn't understand the significance until I explained what night it was. He looked up. He went white when I told him he'll testify. He will. He's been carrying it without knowing he was carrying it, and now that he knows, he wants it gone. Third, Rose said, a night watchman at the Hessler spread, about 2 miles east, name's Fletcher. He smelled smoke on the wind 2 hours before the fire was reported. Recorded it in his watch log. He kept a log, old habit, because it was strange. Smoke in November, in the middle of the night from the wrong direction. The log still exists, Gideon said. Fletcher has kept every watch log he's ever written in a box under his bed. Silas allowed himself a small, satisfied expression. He's a very organized man. 3 witnesses. 3 people who had seen something, said nothing, and had been living inside that nothing ever since. You said 4. Rose, Silas, closed the notebook, set it on his knee, looked at Rose in the particular way that preceded something significant. The 4th one isn't exactly a witness, he said. Then what is he? A pause. His name is Clem Burridge. He's a blacksmith, 45 years old. He's been living for 5 years in a way that makes sense if you know what he knows, and looks like a man slowly ruining himself if you don't. He was there, Rose said. Not a question. Silas looked at her. He was there. The fire on the step, the cold around them. Gideon standing still and quiet, in the way that very large men can be very still, which is different from smaller men being still, the way a mountain is different from a stone. How much did he know? Rose said. When he agreed to help, he says Hale told him they were going to frighten the Brennans, threatened to burn the outbuildings if they didn't agree to a new payment arrangement. Silas's voice was careful, level. He says he didn't understand what was actually happening. Until he stopped. Until what? Rose said. Until he heard the door being locked from the outside, the step, the cold, the mountain. He tried to stop it, Silas said. That's what he says. I believe him for what that's worth. He moved toward the door, and Hale. He paused again. Shorter this time. Hale made it clear that interfering would result in Clem being charged alongside him. If Clem talked, they'd both hang. If Clem stayed quiet, only one person knew the truth. And Clem stayed quiet, Rose said. Clem has been drinking himself hollow for 5 years, Silas said. Quietly, steadily. He has a wife who doesn't know why, children who don't know why, and a sound in his head that I think only goes away when the drinking is heavy enough. Silence. He'll testify? Gideon said. I sat with him for 4 hours, Silas said. At the end of those 4 hours, he said, it doesn't matter what happens to me. What matters is I stop carrying this by myself. Rose looked out at the mountains. 5 years. 5 years of ashes and quiet, and a man drinking himself sideways, and a woman waiting to be asked, and a watchman's log sitting in a box under a bed. 5 years of truth that nobody had come to collect, and the physical evidence, she said. From the site itself? Silas reached into his jacket with his good arm, carefully, produced a small cloth bundle. He set it on the step and opened it, metal fragments, twisted and blackened. The bottom rim of what had once been a kerosene drum, still clearly identifiable by its shape. A piece of ironwork, distorted by intense heat, and one more thing, set apart from the others. Small, flat, the size of a thumbnail, a button, brass, tarnished almost to black by 5 years of Montana weather, but not so far gone that you couldn't make out the 2 letters stamped into it D. Rose looked at it for a long time. Walter Hale, the button would have been on his coat. The coat he wore that night, lost in the dark, maybe, or dropped when he was moving quickly. In the corner of the barn, where a man would stand if he was bracing a door shut from the outside. 5 years in the ashes waiting. Where did you find that? She said. Corner of the foundation wall, Silas said. East side. He would have been standing there when he stopped. Chose a different ending. He would have been standing there. Rose picked it up, held it in her palm, so light. The weight of something that would end a man was so much lighter than she'd imagined. He's going to know you were at the site, Gideon said to Silas. He's going to know by now that someone was asking questions in that whole county, Silas said. Hale doesn't send hired men after someone unless he thinks they found something worth eliminating. A beat, which means he thinks we found something, Rose said, which means we have so time is limited. Yes, that night. Danny asleep. The captain quiet, Silas sleeping too, or trying to, in the room they'd prepared for him. Rose and Gideon at the table, not talking, just present. She had the button in her hand. Had been turning it over since Silas put it down. The habit of a person who needs to feel something real while thinking about things that don't feel real yet. How do we do it? She said. The sheriff in this county knows Hale, Gideon said, has known him for 15 years. So the sheriff, not the county sheriff, no. Then where does someone take this? She held up the button. 4 witnesses, physical evidence, a man who was there. Where does it go so it can't be buried by money and history? Gideon looked at her. Not somewhere, he said. To everyone. She looked back at him. The public, he said. Open square. Cold Creek has a town square and a large population of people who knew the Brennan family and who have been living next to Walter Hale for a decade without knowing what he did. He paused. You can buy one judge. You can buy one deputy. You can't buy everyone who shows up because they want to know the truth about their neighbor. Rose thought about standing in front of people. In front of everyone, speaking. 20 years of learning that her voice was not a thing she was allowed to have. 20 years of carefully surviving by being quiet and invisible and small, her voice. In front of everyone. I'll be there, Gideon said. Not, I'll do it for you. Not let me handle it. Just, I'll be there. She understood the difference. She'd been learning to understand a lot of differences lately. We need one more person, she said. Someone who knows the system from inside. Someone who can tell us how Hale will try to respond legally when we go public so we can anticipate it. Gideon nodded, slowly. Orrin Taft. He said she didn't know that name. Former deputy sheriff, Gideon said. Retired 3 years ago, 64 years old. He worked this county for 20 years, he stopped. He knows Walter Hale. Knew him while Hale was doing what Hale did, and he didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. He didn't stop it, Rose said. He didn't stop it. Will he help now? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When I told Silas to come here, he said, I told Silas to make one stop on the way. To deliver a message, he looked at his coffee. I told Orrin Taft that someone had been carrying the truth about the Brennan fire for 5 years, and they needed someone who knew how Walter Hale operated from inside the system. And Gideon looked up. Silas said when he stopped at Taft's place, the man opened the door and said, Tell whoever it is, I should have come years ago. Rose looked at the button in her palm. All that time, all those years, all that truth. Waiting for someone to come and collect it. Rose went to bed that night with the button still in her hand. She didn't mean to fall asleep holding it, but she did. She slept the way she'd been sleeping lately. Deeper than before, without the snap awake of danger, without the counting of hours until morning made things safer. Just sleep. And at some point before dawn, she had a dream. Not a memory dream. Not kerosene and smoke, and the sound of a man arranging his face. A different kind. She was standing in a field she didn't recognize. Wide and open, mountains in the distance. The air was the particular quality of spring air in high country. Cold still, but with something underneath the cold, a promise, the smell of things about to come back. She was standing alone, except she wasn't afraid. She woke up with that feeling still in her chest. Small, new, fragile the way new things are fragile. But there she looked at the ceiling in the gray pre-dawn light, the cabin settling around her. The fire somewhere down the hall, low but breathing. And somewhere outside, the first bird of morning, trying out a note, just one. Testing whether the world was ready for it. She thought, I'm going to stand up in front of everyone. She thought, I'm going to say his name and what he did. She thought, I am 20 years old, and I have never once in my life been allowed to just say the truth out loud. And then, the part that surprised her even inside her own head, she thought, I can't wait. Not, I'm afraid, and I'll do it anyway. Not, I have no choice. I can't wait. She turned that over, held it the way she'd been holding the button. Outside, the bird tried a second note. The mountain caught the first light. Rose Calloway sat up in bed, put her feet on the floor, and began the day. Orrin Taft had arrived 2 days before the reckoning. He'd ridden 4 days to get there. Straight through, stopping only when the horse needed to. He came on a bay horse that moved like a horse with opinions, and an elderly dog of indeterminate breed that apparently went everywhere Orrin went. The dog settled immediately in front of the fireplace, like it had been waiting years for this specific fire. Orrin himself was 64 years old, and built like a man who had once been very large, and had let time compress him down to something still solid, but more concentrated. White hair. A face that had the particular quality of a face that had seen too much, and decided to stop being surprised by any of it. He came inside, he looked at Rose. She looked at him. I owe you an apology, he said. Before sitting down, before removing his coat, before anything, we haven't met, she said. I know. He held her gaze. I'm apologizing for that. For all the mornings I drove past that farm and told myself it was someone else's problem. He stopped, his jaw moved once. I knew your father, what he was, what he did to people. I had a badge for 20 years, and I used it to look the other way, because looking the right way was complicated. And Walter Hale was the kind of man who made things complicated for people who made things complicated for him. The dog shifted by the fire. Nobody said anything. I lost sleep over it, Orrin said. For 5 years. That's not an excuse. That's just information, man. Rose, 64 years old. Former deputy. A dog that trusted him. A face that had come here of its own accord, because some things cannot be carried forever. Sit down, she said. The coffee's strong. Orrin sat down. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. I need you to tell me how Walter is going to fight this. Every legal angle. Every favor he can call in. Every person in this county he has something on. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I need to know what we're walking into. Orrin looked at her steadily. All right, he said, and he told her. 2 days. They spent 2 days at the table, Orrin. Silas. Gideon. Rose maps spread out. Names written down. The machinery of one man's power laid out in the cold morning light like something that looked very different exposed to air than it had looked when it was buried. Walter Hale had money. Not as much as people thought. The farm was still strangled in debt. The Brennan note had been the largest creditor, but not the only one. Without those 5 people to pressure, the other creditors had simply kept sending letters. Letters Walter had been ignoring. He had connections. The county sheriff was not a friend exactly, but was a man who had learned that Walter's bad side was a costly place to be. 2 of the 3 county judges had had dealings with Walter over the years. Not corrupt exactly. Just careful. He had fear, the greatest currency. People in that county had watched what happened to people who crossed Walter Hale. The Brennan fire, other things, smaller things. But the pattern was visible if you knew to look. The fear is the main thing, Orrin said. On the second morning, coffee. The dog at his feet. His money is thinner than it looks. His connections are transactional. They'll hold as long as it costs them nothing to hold. But the fear breaks if everyone sees the truth at the same time, Rose said. Orrin looked at her. Yes, because you can silence one person. You can discredit one person. You can't silence a crowd that's already heard it. That's exactly right. So we go public. The square, Cold Creek. Everyone who will come. It's a risk, Silas said. Everything is a risk, Rose said. Silence is a risk. I spent 20 years being quiet because I thought it was the safe option, and all it did was give him more time. The table was quiet. I'll send word, Orrin said. I still know enough people in that county. People who will come if I tell them there's something they need to hear. Don't tell them what it's about, Gideon said. I won't. Orrin looked at his cup. I'll just tell them. There's been a debt unpaid in this county for 5 years, and it's time to settle it. The word went out through the same mountain country network. Through Orrin's 30 years of people who owed him nothing, except the memory of a man who'd once been fair with them when fairness was inconvenient. Through Silas's connections in the trading posts and supply routes. Through the ordinary way that extraordinary things travel. Person to person, quietly, with the particular urgency of something that people had been wanting to hear for a long time without knowing they were waiting. The morning of the reckoning came in cold and clear, no clouds, no warning. Just Montana sky, going from black to blue to the specific shade of pale that meant the air was clean and the light would be sharp and nothing would be hidden by weather today, which felt appropriate. Rose had been awake since 4. Not from fear. Not from the old snap-awake of danger in the house. She'd lain in the dark and listened to the cabin and thought about the day ahead, and felt something she was still learning the name for readiness. That was the word. She'd felt afraid plenty. She knew afraid in all its flavors. The cold afraid, the numb afraid, the kind that lived so deep in your bones you forgot it wasn't just part of you. But readiness was different. Readiness had direction, a face. It pointed at something, instead of just being a state you existed inside. She got up at 4:15, made coffee. The same time she made it every morning. Except this morning, she made it the way she liked it. Not the way Walter had required it. not the careful calibration of temperature and bitterness and strength that she'd learned to produce to avoid consequence. Us. Her way dark. Then necessary. 2 sugars. She drank it at the table and watched the window go from black to gray. Cold Creek's town square was not large. It could hold maybe 300 people comfortably. On the morning of the gathering, it held considerably more than 300 people. Rose stood at the edge of the crowd and counted faces. Farmers, merchants, women in their good coats because something in the message had told them this was a good coat occasion. Children kept close. Men with the careful expressions of people who understood that something significant was about to happen and had opinions about which direction it would go. She recognized some faces. People who had bought grain from Walter over the years, people who had done business with him, people who had looked at her when she was younger and he brought her into town, and looked away because looking at her too long might mean having to say something. They were here now. Which meant something. Danny was at the neighbors. He'd been told there was an important grown-up meeting. He'd been given 3 peppermint sticks and the temporary custody of a very patient hound. He'd accepted these terms with the dignity of a small man who understood he was being managed but chose not to make it difficult. Rose had hugged him before she left. He'd hugged back. Hard. The uncomplicated way children hug, without any of the hesitation that adults develop after too many experiences with arms that hurt rather than hold. She'd stood there for a moment holding on to that. He'd made her promise to come back with a full report. She'd promised. It was the easiest promise she'd made in 20 years. Then let go. Orrin Taft walked to the center of the square first. He didn't have to call for attention. His presence did it. 64 years old, white-haired. The badge gone from his coat, retired, but the carriage of a man who had worn authority for a long time. People quieted the way they quiet when something real is about to begin. "Most of you know me," Orrin said. His voice carried, not loud, just clear. The voice of a man who had learned that volume is less important than certainty. "I was deputy sheriff of this county for 20 years. I stepped down 3 years ago." He paused, looked at the crowd. "I stepped down partly because I was tired, and partly because I had spent 20 years not doing something I should have done, and I could not continue to accept a salary for a job I was not fully performing." The crowd was very quiet. "There is a debt in this county," Orrin said, "an old one, 5 years old, and I am one of the people who owes it." He turned, and Silas stepped forward. Silas had done this before. Not this exact thing, but the presenting of evidence. The laying out of a case before people who needed to understand it. He had a particular gift for it, the ability to begin at the beginning and move forward in a line, without flourishes, without drama, because the facts themselves were dramatic enough, and adding anything to them was an insult to their weight. He started with the night of November 5 years ago. He talked about a farm 5 miles north of town, a family of 5, a debt that had reached its end. He talked about kerosene, about a wagon traveling a road it had no business traveling at that hour, about the specific pattern of a fire that moves too fast and burns too hot to be accidental. He presented the metal fragments. He held them up so the people in the front could see, passed them back, let them move through the crowd hand to hand. He presented the watch log. Fletcher, the night watchman, stepped forward when Silas said his name, opened the log to the right page, turned it so people could see the notation, the time, the direction, the smell of smoke from the wrong place at the wrong hour, written in a careful hand by a man who recorded what he observed because he had been trained to observe. Then Silas said, "I'm going to ask a woman named Edna Holt to speak." Edna Holt was 70 years old and had been sitting in the front of the crowd in her best coat, with her hands folded in her lap since before most people arrived. She stood up. She was not a large woman. She walked with a cane. But she walked to the center of the square with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had made up her mind about something and was not going to be in a hurry about the doing of it. She told what she'd seen, the wagon, the horse she recognized, the smell, the time on her watch. She told it simply, the way old women sometimes tell terrible things simply. because they have lived long enough to know that decoration only insults the truth. I did not speak for 5 years, she said at the end, because I was afraid, and because a man had looked me in the eye and told me that roads at night were dangerous. She paused. I am 70 years old, and I have decided that I am more afraid of going to my grave with this in my chest than I am of Walter Hale. She walked back to her seat. The crowd made no sound. That particular silence, the kind that isn't absence, the kind that means everyone in it is doing the same thing at the same time, which is carrying the weight of what they just heard without anywhere to put it down yet. Then Jeb Alcott spoke, then Fletcher, the watchman, in person, reading from his log. And then Silas said a name, Clem Burridge. The crowd knew that name. Clem Burridge had lived in Cold Creek for 15 years. He shod horses, fixed ironwork. He had a wife named Agnes and 3 children who went to the schoolhouse on Maple Road. He had been, for the last 5 years, visibly, quietly, steadily falling apart. And everyone had their own private explanation for why. Because explanations that don't require action are more comfortable than ones that do. He came from the back of the crowd. He didn't walk quickly. His hands were not steady. But he walked in a straight line, and he kept his eyes forward, and when he reached the center of the square, he stopped and turned, and looked at the people who had known him for 15 years. He was crying before he started talking, not performatively, not for effect. The way a man cries who has been holding something for 5 years and has finally put it down and the muscles don't know how to stop yet. He told them all of it. How Walter Hale had come to him. How he'd explained the job as a warning, a threat, pressure, not harm. He'd said not harm. He'd said just make them afraid enough to give more time. Clem had bills of his own that year. A sick child. He'd said yes. He told them about arriving at the Brennan farm in the dark. About spreading what he'd been told to spread. About the moment when the family was inside and the door was being moved and he understood. Not suspected, not feared, understood what was actually happening. He told them about moving toward the door, about the gun. He told them what he heard. He did not use elaborate language. He was not an elaborate man. He said what he heard in plain words and let the plain words do what they did, which was fill the square with a silence, so complete that you could hear the horses shifting at the hitching posts on the far side. I am going to stand here, Clem said, in front of every person in this county who I have looked in the eye for 5 years. And I am going to tell you that I helped a man do an evil thing because I was afraid and because I convinced myself it wasn't going to be what it was. And then, when it was what it was, I stayed quiet to save myself. He stopped, looked at his hands. There is no version of that where I am not guilty, he said. I know that. I'm not standing here to ask you to forgive me. I'm standing here because a woman who survived Walter Hale for 20 years found the courage to tell the truth. And I decided that I was not going to make her carry it alone. Walter Hale arrived at the square at 11:17. Rose knew because she had Oren's watch and had been checking it. He came on his horse, fast. Alone, which meant his hired men had either deserted or hadn't been reachable, or had looked at the size of the crowd and made a business decision. He pushed through the outer edge of the gathered people with a big man's assumption that crowds move for him. They didn't move. Not entirely, not the way they used to. Something had shifted in the square in the last hour. Something invisible. The kind of shift that happens when a group of people stops believing the thing they've been told to believe and starts believing something else. You can't see it happen. You can only see the after. Walter pulled his horse up at the edge of the crowd and looked at the center and saw Clem Burridge and went a color that wasn't quite any of the normal colors. Stop, his voice. The one that had always worked. The one that rooms obeyed. This is over. Whatever these people have told you, Walter Hale, Silas's voice carrying over the crowd. You are welcome to stand here and listen, Silas said. Or you are welcome to leave. But you cannot stop what has already happened. These are lies. Walter looked at the crowd, doing the old thing, the calculation, looking for the faces that were still with him, the ones he had leverage on. These people, Orrin Taft said, stepping forward, have made statements that are going on the record, in writing, with witnesses. Before you arrived, Walter looked at Oren. Oren looked back at him. 20 years of a man looking away. 20 years of careful arrangements and deliberate blindness. The look Oren was giving Walter now was not that look. Walter's jaw tightened. "You have no legal authority," he said to Oren. "You're not the deputy." "No," Oren said. "I'm not." He held Walter's gaze. "I'm just a man who knows what you did and is standing in front of witnesses saying so. You're welcome to sue me." Walter looked at the crowd again. And this time Rose could see him see it. The thing that had shifted. The crowd that had always moved for him. That had always found somewhere else to look. That had always, when it came down to it, decided that Walter Hale's particular flavor of power was more present and more dangerous than justice for people who were already gone. They were not looking away, 300 people, looking directly at him, and then, from the left side of the crowd, Rose stepped out. She had not planned the exact moment. That was the thing nobody would believe later, but it was true. She had not choreographed it, had not rehearsed it, had not stood in front of the window of the cabin practicing what her entrance would look like. She just walked out from among the people and stood in the open space between the crowd and Walter's horse. He stared at her. She looked back. 20 years of that face. 20 years of reading every micro-expression on it, the gathering. Before a blow, the satisfaction after. The particular arrangement that meant she had somehow, despite her best efforts, done something that required punishment. 20 years of being a student of that face because studying it was survival. She was done studying it. She had a different relationship with it now. She was looking at the face of a man who had done something terrible and been protected from the consequences of it. By her silence, and her silence was over. She thought briefly of a tin box under floorboards, a birth certificate, a name that was never his to give her. "I was 15, she said, her voice, out loud, in the square, carrying the way voices carry when there is nothing left to hide them. "I was 15 years old and I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw you in the yard." She held his gaze. "I saw the kerosene. I saw the rags. I saw which direction you drove." She paused. "I have known for 5 years what you did. I have been quiet for 5 years because I was in your house, and being quiet was the difference between surviving and not." Walter's horse shifted under him. He didn't move. "I am not in your house anymore," Rose said. Something happened in Walter's face. Not remorse. She didn't expect remorse. Walter Hale had no more remorse in him than the fence post she'd been tied to. What moved across his face was something rawer and more honest than remorse, fear, and underneath the fear, the sudden, clarifying understanding that he had lost, not might lose, not was losing, had lost. The crowd was already witness. The statements were already recorded. Clem Burridge's testimony was already in the air, and in the ears of 300 people, and testimony like that doesn't go back. You can't unsay it. You can't unhear it. It lives in the people who received it, and they take it home and talk about it, and the truth stops belonging to the person who revealed it, and starts belonging to everyone. It was done. He knew it. She could see him know it. And in the moment when he knew it, the moment when Walter Hale understood that the machinery of his survival had finally, irreversibly broken down, he did what he had always done when logic failed him. He reached for something physical. The gun came out fast. Not aimed, just drawn. The act of a man who has run out of every other kind of move and has fallen back to the only one that had always worked. The crowd moved back, away. That involuntary collective lurch of 300 people encountering sudden danger. Walter's horse shied. He pulled it back, rough. Eyes going around the square. The gun not quite pointed at anyone yet. The last moment of a man who doesn't know what he's about to do and is hoping the gun itself will figure it out. Rose did not move back with the crowd. She took one step forward, just one, toward him. Which was insane. Which was, she knew. She was aware. She was not unaware. Which was the opposite of sensible. The rational move was back, away, behind the large man who was currently materializing at her left. Except she had been moving backward for 20 years. And she was done. "Put it down, Walter," she said. Her voice was steady. She was aware that was strange. She noted it from a distant part of herself. The part that was watching this happen while the rest of her was in it steady. "Put it down," she said again. "There are 300 people here. Every single one of them has now heard everything. The gun doesn't change what they heard." Walter stared at her. The gun was shaking, not aimed, just held. The weapon of a man who had forgotten that weapons require a target and a reason, and he had run out of both. Gideon Voss stepped up, not in front of Rose, beside her, left shoulder, even with hers. The way two people stand when they have decided to be in the same place and mean the same thing. He didn't say anything. He was Gideon. He didn't need to say anything. He was 6 feet 8 inches and 280 pounds, and he was standing next to Rose Calloway in the Cold Creek Town Square with no weapon in his hands and no expression on his face, except the expression of a man who has made a decision and is done making it. Orrin Taft came from the other side, 64 years old. Former deputy, no badge, just a man, standing 3 people, in a line, facing one man on a horse with a shaking gun and 5 years of a lie falling down around him. Walter looked at them, looked at the crowd. His horse moved under him again, and he pulled at the reins, and the horse didn't want to be here either, and somewhere in the combination of all of it, the crowd and the testimony. Why, and Rose standing there, not moving back, and Gideon next to her, and Orrin next to them. And the horse trying to go, and the gun that had no clear target. Walter Hale's hand dropped. The gun went to his side. He sat on his horse in the Cold Creek Town Square, and he was small. For the first time in Rose's 20 years of knowing him, he was small. Not physically. Physically, he was the same man who had filled doorways and cast shadows and made rooms reorganize themselves around his presence. But small, the way things become small when the thing that was holding them up is removed. 3 men from the edge of the crowd moved forward, ranchers. Men who had known the Brennan family. Men who had taken the measure of Walter Hale over 20 years and were done giving him the benefit of a doubt they'd been running out of for some time. They took his horse's bridle. They took his arm. The gun went to Orrin, who accepted it, with the careful hands of a man who had handled weapons for 20 years and respected what they were. Walter was off his horse, on the ground, hands being tied, efficiently, by men who had spent lives tying things and knew how it was done. He looked at Rose one last time. She expected the old thing, the threat dressed as a sentence. The cruelty that had followed her like a second shadow for 20 years, he said. "None of this changes anything." She looked at him. "It changes everything," she said. "But you don't have to understand that. You just have to go." They took him away. The crowd didn't cheer. She'd expected something. Some release of all that held breath. But what the square did was something more complicated, more human. People turned to each other, talked quietly, with a particular intensity of people processing something that requires processing. Women who had passed Rose in the street for years without knowing what her life was. Men who had shaken Walter's hand at the feed store. People who had made the small daily decision to not ask questions about things they'd noticed and filed away and chosen not to examine. They weren't cheering. They were reckoning with what they'd heard and what they'd not said and what they'd allowed by not saying it. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be. Edna Holt found Rose first. She took Rose's hands in both of hers and held them for a moment, saying nothing. "Then, you look like your mother." Rose stilled. "You knew her 30 years ago." Before she married, Edna squeezed her hands once. She was brave too. It skips things sometimes. And sometimes, it doesn't. She let go. Walked away with her cane. Rose stood with her hands still out where Edna had left them. Orrin came to her later. The square was thinning. People heading home to have the conversations that would continue for weeks. The truth settling into the county the way weather settles. Not all at once, but pervasively. Changing the feel of the air even after the main event had passed. "There will be a formal proceeding," Orrin said. "County court. Clem will testify. So will Edna. Fletcher's log will be entered. The physical evidence." He paused. "You'll need to give a formal statement. I know. It will be difficult. I know that too." She looked at him. "I did a more difficult thing this morning in front of everyone. A courtroom with a judge seems almost manageable by comparison." Orrin looked at her, something in his face. The old deputy's face. The face that had looked away for 20 years. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I said it before. I'll probably say it again. Because one time doesn't cover it, I know," Rose said. "You're going to have to do more than apologize. I know that, too." "Good." She held his gaze. "So do it," he nodded. Once. Slow. The nod of a man making a commitment. He did do it, as it turned out. Orrin Taft spent the next year making sure the county had a clearer, documented process for situations like the one he'd looked away from for 2 decades. He did not do it in a way that required praise. He did not make speeches about it. He just did it, which is its own kind of amends. The trial was in the spring. It lasted 4 days. The evidence was, as Silas had predicted, considerable. The testimony was, as Silas had also predicted, difficult to listen to and impossible to dismiss. 3 judges sat on the panel, because a case of this weight required more than one set of eyes, and 2 of the 3 had never done business with Walter Hale in any way that compromised them. Clem Burridge testified for 2 full hours. He did not look at Walter once. He looked at the panel of judges, and he said what he had to say, and his voice broke twice, and he let it break and kept going anyway. He accepted his own portion of legal consequence with the stillness of a man who has been waiting to put something down and is finally putting it down. Of it even legally acknowledged is less than the weight of carrying it alone. Walter testified in his own defense. He was not good at it. 30 years of a story that worked in a county where he held the power to enforce it turned out not to translate well to a room with judges and a formal record and witnesses who had already been heard. The thing that makes a lie work is the surrounding silence. In the silence, a lie fills all the space. In a room full of spoken truth, a lie is just a smaller, less convincing thing. He was convicted on the 5th day. Murder, 1st degree. 5 counts. Rose was not in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She had given her formal statement 2 weeks earlier. She'd said what she had to say in the careful language of testimony, which is not the same as speaking in a town square, but arrives at the same place by a different road. She'd answered every question. She'd identified the button. She'd described the smell of the kerosene with the specificity of someone who had lived with that smell inside her memory for 5 years, and then she'd left. Because she had said everything she needed to say, and the rest of it, the legal machinery, the formal pronouncement, the sentence, was not hers to witness. It was not her conclusion that mattered. Her conclusion had happened in the town square. When she'd taken one step forward, Silas Drum left on a gray morning 2 weeks after the verdict. He packed his kit with the efficiency of a man who was always in the process of leaving and had made peace with it. His horse was well rested. He looked better than he had. His arm had healed cleanly. He shook Gideon's hand at the gate. He looked at Rose. "You did well," he said. "You did the work," she said. "The work doesn't matter without someone who can stand up and say why it matters." He looked at her steadily. "Not everyone can do that. Most people can't. I almost didn't. But you did," he said, "which is the only version that counts." He rode south. She watched him until the trail bent and he was gone. Spring arrived the way Montana spring arrives. Slowly, grudgingly, with several false starts and at least one late snowstorm that came out of nowhere and covered everything in 2 inches of new white, just when things were starting to think they were safe to grow. But it came. The garden behind the cabin, dead through winter, latticed with the brown stalks of last year, started to show things, small and tentative, green at the edges of the soil. The kind of green that doesn't commit to itself fully yet, because it has learned that the world is not always ready for it. Danny had opinions about the garden. Many of them. He wanted to plant corn because it was the tallest. He wanted to plant sunflowers because they turned to face the sun, and he found this admirable on a philosophical level. He wanted to dig a channel from the creek because he had developed theories about irrigation that Gideon listened to, with the patient seriousness he brought to all of Danny's theories. "The channel would go here," Danny said, drawing in the dirt with a stick, "and then here. And then it splits. Splits where? Both ways, so both sides get water." Gideon looked at the diagram. "That's not a bad idea." Danny looked up, assessed whether this was real or management, decided it was real. stood straighter. I know, Rose, sitting on the step with coffee, watched this exchange. The sun was doing the 4 o'clock thing that Danny had told her about in the first week, hitting the mountain face to the east at an angle that turned it gold. Not yellow, not orange. Gold specifically, like something valuable being displayed. Admiral was on the woodpile. The other one was somewhere nearby, doing nothing in a suspicious way as was traditional. Rose put her hand on her stomach, just rested it there. Hadn't told anyone yet. She'd known for 2 weeks. Had been moving the knowledge around inside herself. Getting used to the weight of it, not the bad kind of weight. She knew the difference now. She'd had enough practice. The bad kind pressed down and flattened. This kind expanded, filled space. Made room, it was the making room kind. Gideon was walking toward the step. He'd been fixing something on the fence. There was always something on the fence, which was the nature of fences, and he was coming back toward the cabin. He stopped when he reached her, looked down, at her face first. The way he always looked at her face first, a habit she'd noticed and thought about, and decided was the nicest thing anyone had ever done, without knowing they were doing it. Then, his eyes went to her hand, on her stomach. And he was still, the way he was still in the yard that first morning. The stillness of a man whose brain has received information and is running it very carefully before issuing any responses. She watched him run it. Watched the moment it arrived, his face did something she'd never seen Gideon Voss's face do. It broke open. Not into tears immediately. Into something before tears. The rawness under the thing. The part that lived beneath all the competent quietness. A man who had spent 30 years being sufficient, being enough. Managing on his own, and managing it well, and never asking anyone to help carry anything. Discovering that there was something he hadn't known he was waiting for. He sat down on the step, next to her, his knee against hers. He put his hand over hers, over her stomach. Where her hand was, he didn't say anything. That was fine. She didn't need him to say anything. They sat like that, the two of them on the step in the 4 o'clock gold light, while Danny lectured the garden about irrigation, and Admiral held court from the woodpile, and the mountain did what mountains do. Then Gideon made a sound. One, quiet. The sound of a man whose chest has run out of room for something, and it has to go somewhere. He was crying. She didn't look at him, because some things are private. And she knew the difference now between privacy and isolation. One is chosen, one is forced. And she honored the privacy of it by looking at the mountain and letting him be in it. After a while, "Are you all right?" she said. "No," he said. She waited. Yes, he said. He stopped, tried again. I don't have a word for what I am right now." "Neither do I," she said. "I've had 2 weeks to get used to it, and I still don't have a word." A pause. "Is that okay?" he said. She looked at him. "That's more than okay," she said. "That's the point. We figure out the word together." Danny appeared at the edge of the garden, looked at his uncle's face, looked at Rose, did the 8-year-old calculation. "Are you crying?" he said to Gideon. "Yes," Gideon said. "Why?" "Because," Gideon said, "something very good happened." Danny thought about this, nodded, filed it into his understanding of adults, which was a folder that kept getting thicker and more confusing. "Okay," Danny said. "Can I still do the channel?" "Yes," Gideon said. "Today?" "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Danny agreed, with the air of a man who is willing to negotiate. He went back to his diagram in the dirt, made some additions. Rose looked at the mountain, Gideon's hand still over hers, the light exactly what Danny had promised it would be. Gold later, when she thought about how the year had gone. And she would think about it many times. In many seasons, she would return to this, not the square, not the testimony, not the moment. Walter's hand dropped. All of those mattered. All of those were hers in a way that nothing had been hers before. But this, the step, the light, the hand over hers, the sound Gideon made when he ran out of room. This was the moment she understood that survival is not the destination. Survival is just the road. The destination is the step, and the gold light, and the person next to you whose knee is warm against yours. And the child in the garden who wants to redirect a creek and doesn't see any reason why he can't. The destination is this. Just this, being here, without counting the cost. In the morning she made coffee, her way dark. Strong, 2 sugars. She sat at the table and watched the window go from black to gray to blue. The mountain caught the light, and Rose Calloway, who had survived 20 years of mornings that began in cold and fear, and the sound of a chair dragging across a floor, sat in the quiet that had no countdown, and breathed in out, and all the way in again.